We will discuss two terrifying unsolved disappearances in this video. When you're reading the second one, you may believe the plot is simple and straightforward, but then something shocking happens at the very end that throws everything into chaos. Located in California's Cascade Mountain Range, Mount Shasta, sometimes called White Mountain, is an active volcano. At 4,322 meters, or 14,179 feet, it is the second highest peak in the state and the second highest in the range. Nearly twice as much snow falls on the mountain, and its environs as the US average, and an eruption might happen at any moment. But it was believed to have happened around 3,200 years ago, the previous time. Climbers also flock to the mountain, with Avalanche Gulch, located on its southwest side, serving as the primary ascent route. Although a skilled climber might reach the peak in a single day, the majority choose to spend the night at the 50-50 Plateau Campground, which is about halfway up, or the slightly higher Helen Lake Campground, before tackling the summit the following day. It takes 4 miles of hiking up 2 distinct paths to reach a camp, where an ancient Sierra Club cabin serves as the starting point for your ascent. A summit pass is also required to reach the peak. Many urban legends and folktales center around Mount Shasta. The local Native American communities held the mountain in high regard, considering it a holy site and the dwelling place of the universe's creator. There are other, more fantastical tales that concern a race known as the Lemurians. Legend has it that in the 1940s, shoppers saw a group of 7-foot-tall individuals wearing white robes and sandals as they made their way to the corner store to stock up. Plus, they only deal in solid gold as currency. Legend has it that the mountain is home to a race of extraterrestrial creatures that call the crystal city of Telos their home. Whenever you see a cloud shaped like a saucer at the peak, it's only a cover for a flying saucer that lands above Telos to deliver goods. Despite his skepticism, Carl Herbert Landers was captivated by the mountain and resolved to reach the peak at the age of 69. Carl climbed much and was physically fit for his age. He completed the Boston Marathon in around 5.5 hours, and he ran every morning. He set his sights on Mount Shasta because he wanted to climb the highest peak in every county in California. Weather and altitude sickness prevented him from continuing in May of 1998, when he had really attempted. He returned the next year to mark it off his list. Carl, together with his pals Barry and Milt, slept at a hotel close to the trailhead on May 21st, 1999. They gathered their climbing gear and set out for the cabin for the 4-mile trek to camp at 4 in the morning. They reached the camp and started climbing the mountain a couple of hours later, despite the fact that the journey was hindered by heavy snowdrifts that made the traveling tough. They decided to spend the night at the 50-50 Plateau rather than go on to the Lake Helen camp due to the snow's impact on their progress. Regrettably, this evening was quite difficult. Carl was taking Diamox, a medicine for high-altitude sickness, and he was also experiencing diarrhea, so it was either that or something else. The situation was so dire that he had to brave the storm and exit his tent in the dead of night to relieve himself. It also meant he had trouble sleeping and felt chilly and dehydrated when he got up that day. This made him anxious that he might hold his buddies up, so he planned to depart early to beat them to Lake Helen. Before beginning the ascent, he donned his rust-brown coat, ski trousers, boots, and crampons. To reach the lake, he needed to just climb 650 feet, 198 meters around the mountainside, which was a breeze for a guy with his level of fitness. After seeing Carl vanish around the mountainside, Carl's companions began to gather their belongings in preparation to pursue him. They resumed their original course 30 minutes thereafter. With their low load, they planned to check the weather at the lake. If it seemed favorable for a push to the top, they would return, gather their supplies, and go on. However, Barry began to feel nauseous shortly after setting off with Milt, so he retraced his steps to the 50-50 Plateau. Milt persisted and arrived to the lake quickly. Nevertheless, he was disappointed to see that Carl was nowhere to be found. After all, the sky was blue, so he couldn't help but wonder whether Carl had just chosen to press on. The men who were camping nearby informed him that a man had passed through and was currently climbing the mountain when he inquired whether they had seen him. Carl was taking it easy since he wasn't feeling well, but Milt still decided to go after him and see if he could catch up. However, he was unsuccessful in his attempts. It didn't take long for whatever it was to start climbing. After Milt got a close look, he determined that it was definitely not Carl. His attire was totally different. After that, Milt went back to the lake to inquire around again, but nobody else had been there. However, Milt reasoned that, on his way back down to the 50-50 plateau, he had likely just narrowly missed him. Because of this, he persisted, fully anticipating to meet up with his two companions at their tent. Unfortunately, Carl was nowhere to be found in their tent, and all of his other belongings were still inside when he arrived at 5 o'clock. Thinking Carl could have opted to return to the base for medical treatment, he realized then that Carl couldn't have attempted to reach the peak and chose to return down. However, neither that location nor the hotel had any results for him. At that point, he called the police to formally report Carl missing since he was becoming more concerned. Grizz Adams, a veteran of more than 400 search and rescue missions, was brought in by the sheriff's department on the morning of May 26th. Then Grizz rounded together all of his friends and family. They rode horses, skied, and walked to find anything. Air ambulance service and California Highway Patrol helicopters, one of which has an infrared sensor, were sent. Additionally, volunteers from other counties and Carl's own running club labored on the ground in a grid arrangement. Expert mountaineers teamed up with the group to descend the mountain in every way imaginable and discover every inch of the peak. Even with the help of tracker dogs, they were unable to detect a smell. In a strange twist, they polled all the mountaineers that day, but none recalled seeing him at the lake or along the trail that led from the 50-50 plateau to it. They had to relocate the headquarters from a nearby playground to the airport because the search became so large. However, Carl and the tools he had left behind that day remained a mystery despite all of this. No footprints, no signs, nothing could lead them to him. If not for the equipment he abandoned at 50-50 Plateau, the searchers would have been completely confused, as if he had never been there. On Mount Shasta, this was the second occurrence of a man going missing. There were up to 100 other climbers on the mountain, and no crevices or other places to conceal a corpse. Thus, this was the first time someone had gone missing while walking on a level, simple road. The locals would go so far as to say that he was swallowed whole by the mountain. Also, keep in mind that after you're over the 50-50 plateau, you're no longer covered by trees. Instead, you're staring at barren rocky slopes. Carl has yet to be located as of today. Many theories have been advanced in an attempt to deduce the cause of this disappearance, but so far, no proof has been found. His last known whereabouts were that morning, just before they left their campground, if Milt and Barry are to be believed. Even though it's very improbable that they weren't being truthful, he was there when they checked into the camp to have their permits examined. His sudden and complete disappearance begs the question, as does the fate of so many others like it. It was less than half an hour on a level, straight route from their last sight of him. It would be reasonable to assume that the hundreds of hikers who traversed the 50-50 plateau to reach the lake would have seen anything over the intervening years. There is absolutely nothing, not even a crampon or boot. You couldn't miss the 23-year-old woman's hometown of Durham, North Carolina, Leah Toby Roberts. With the exception of her flawless Spanish, her strong Southern accent accompanied her every word. She stood at 5 feet, flat, and weighed 130 pounds. She was an avid soccer player and vegetarian who enjoyed being active. Her hair was sandy and her eyes were blue. That she sometimes smoked a cigarette or two and drank coffee was her only vice. She was 17 years old in 1993, the year her father was diagnosed with a rare and persistent lung condition. Her mother's untimely death from a heart attack occurred just 3 years after that. Fortunately, North Carolina State University granted Leah a leave of absence when she was a student there, majoring in anthropology and Spanish. Evidently, the experience was distressing. In fact, Leah compared it to being born into a new existence without a mother. 5 years down the road in 1998, she narrowly avoided death herself when a vehicle abruptly swerved in front of her, sending her automobile careening onto the side of the road. Despite surviving, she had surgery to fix her severely fractured leg and implant a metal rod so she could walk again. Leah compared the collision like being reborn, much as she did after her mother passed away. She decided to take a vacation to Costa Rica about a year after she finished her rehabilitation, so she could practice her Spanish and have some fun, apart from the stresses of everyday life. When her father's sickness turned fatal, she lost all enthusiasm for the trip. He passed away just before she was supposed to go. Leah concluded that her father would have preferred that she attend, so she went and made the most of her time there. She chose to forego college only 6 months before she was due to graduate, using the money she received from her dad to support herself for a period after his death. She wished she could simply take some time for herself to write in her diary, play guitar, and take pictures. Clearly, her brother Heath and elder sister Kara weren't too enthusiastic about this scheme. She should probably just give it her all because the money wouldn't last forever, and she was almost done with her degree. She went out more often to meet new people and seemed to be enjoying her life independently. Although her former acquaintances began to see less and less of her as time went on, she seemed to be generally content, albeit reserved at times. After Leah deposited her bequest and realized she didn't have to work, she devoted herself to writing and spent most of her time in a coffee shop in her hometown. There she pondered the meaning of life while sipping coffee and penning poems and diary entries. It seemed to many who knew her that she was having trouble finding her footing after the deaths of her parents, even though she said everything was good with the world. During this period, she developed a passion for the work of one writer, Jack Kerouac, and she used the funds to purchase music and books. She developed a small obsession with his 1950s work, The Dharma Bums, and adored his writing overall. A Zen Buddhist and Kerouac hitchhiked to Desolation Peak in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. The story is semi-fictional. They are U.S. fire lookouts in the book, Forest Fire Service, and they spend 63 days there, falling in love with the natural splendor while smoking, writing, and meditating. She went ahead and organized her own solo trip to Desolation Peak after reading this book because of how profound an impact it had on her. A coffee shop buddy of Leah's would go on to inform Kara, Leah's sister, that she had a feeling Leah would run away to the mountains at some point. Leah had said that she needed to go away to sort herself out after all that had occurred to her in the last several years, but it appeared like she had always wanted to be a free spirit and travel the world. Kara and Leah had a light-hearted phone conversation on March 9th, 2000, during which they laughed and spoke about Leah's upcoming mountain trip. She then proceeded to have a chat with her friend Nicole, during which it seemed as if she had no plans to travel anywhere, and she even volunteered to babysit for her the next day. However, Leah suddenly gathered her belongings, including her cat, into her Jeep Cherokee that afternoon, took $3,000 from her bank account, and vanished before 6 o'clock. Nicole was unconcerned when babysitter Leah failed to appear. Leah assumed it just slipped her memory because, like many authors, she was notoriously forgetful. People began to become worried when Leah was still missing after 2 days. Kara began contacting everybody who may have information about Leah's whereabouts, but nobody had seen her. Kara returned to Leah's apartment 4 days later, on March 13th, in search of clues. There, she discovered that Leah had removed most of her possessions, suggesting that she had gone wherever she wanted to go. On the other hand, something didn't add up after the phone conversation she had with her sister just before she left. Her sister had been quite positive and full of future plans, and none of them were going away. Accordingly, Kara filed a missing persons report for her younger sister. A mysterious message with the date March 9th was also discovered by Kara as she was looking. On the outside of the folded sheet of paper, Leah had depicted the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, partially visible and smiling. Within were sufficient funds to meet 1 month's expenses, as well as a correspondence. Telling them she'd place cookies in the freezer as a farewell gift made some logic, but most of it was strange. Leah reassured Kara that she was safe and that she shouldn't be worried about herself. It pleaded with readers to trust her, themselves, and one another. They were reminded that time flies and that everyone is thinking about them. While she was gone, she donated her room and laptop, 2 of her few important possessions, to anybody who may be interested. Lastly, Kara was instructed to keep in mind Jack Kerouac. They were right. This, together with the photo of the Cheshire Cat smile, convinced Kara to follow in her idol's footsteps. Just so you know, the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland vanished for a while before reappearing at a later point. Kara was certain this was the message, but no one knows when or why the cat does this. Kara fortunately had access to Leah's financial accounts, albeit this was still rather concerning. Leah had granted Kara access just before her Costa Rican vacation, so that she could handle any problems that may arise while she was gone. After obtaining the details, Kara proceeded to Leah's bank and used them to track Leah's whereabouts to the best of her ability. Leah, according to her, had slept the night at a Lebanon, Tennessee motel on March 9th, the day she vanished. As she continued west on Interstate 40, she refueled her automobile with her debit card. The next stop was Oregon, where she arrived 3.5 days after leaving. At about midnight on March 13th, she stopped at a gas station in Brooks, Oregon to fill. following which she continued north on I-5. The transactions unfortunately came to a halt at that point. The police eventually obtained the gas station's CCTV tape, which showed a healthy-looking Leah wearing a wide-brimmed hat. She glanced out the window many times before she stepped outdoors. The gas station's entrance and checkout lanes were the only inside cameras, so no one could tell what she was seeing. In any case, nobody saw her again after this. Kara became even more concerned when her 25th birthday passed without a phone call. It didn't matter where she was, Leah would, if possible, check in on that particular day. For some reason, this made her think that Leah wasn't just making her way to Destination Peak. Rather, something was amiss. A little while later, they discovered Leah's automobile, proving Kara correct. Duo of joggers sprinted along Canyon Creek Road, close to Washington's Mount Baker, on March 18th. Located immediately south of the Canadian border, this minor logging pass links to the Mount Baker Highway, providing access to the major roadways for residents of more isolated residences and logging camps. They began to see garments hanging from trees by the road as they hurried forward. They continued down this path until they came to a wreck at the base of a ravine. Just 100 miles separated the spot where Leah's Jeep was discovered and Desolation Peak. Things get more complicated from here on out. The car allegedly veered off the road at a speed of approximately 40 miles per hour, 64.4 kilometers per hour, leading police to believe it was going far too fast. The automobile seemed to have rolled many times before colliding with a steep hillside, as shown by broken branches and the disarray caused by the contents being tossed about and out of the vehicle. Strangely, the cops didn't believe Leah was in the vehicle when it crashed, and they couldn't find any evidence of a corpse either. Seatbelt damage, a broken windshield, and bloodstains would have been obvious signs that someone was in the vehicle when it crashed, but alas, none of it was present. But there was also no indication that the automobile had been deliberately dumped. The vehicle showed no signs of being pushed, and neither the steering wheel nor the accelerator felt any force. Stranger even was the fact that it didn't seem as if the crash had been abandoned right away. It seemed as if someone had lived there for a brief while before departing, since pillows and blankets were used to cover the windows. On the other hand, if it had been Leah, she presumably abandoned her belongings long ago. Not only was most of the money still there, but so were her checks and credit cards. Along with her CDs, guitar, passport, and driver's license, she also forgot them. An other cherished item for Leah was her mother's diamond engagement ring, which was second only to her cat in importance. The cat's carrier and feeding bowl remained, but the feline had vanished, and a floor mat obscured the ring. Laura and Heath were frightened by this. They couldn't fathom Leah ever parting with the ring. Aside from that, the only piece of information they uncovered was a little souvenir box with a movie ticket to American Beauty, which was shown at a cinema in Bellingham, Washington. A search and rescue team was sent in by the police throughout the inquiry. They used helicopters to look from above and brought in dogs to try to track her whereabouts. After the disaster, the prevailing belief was that she somehow managed to escape into the forest. They continued their hunt for Leah and any indication of her whereabouts over the subsequent 2 weeks, scouring the whole of Canyon Creek Road and the surrounding woodland. No one fitting her description was found at any of the surrounding hospitals, so they continued to search in the hopes that she could have survived the incident but had severe amnesia. Flying out to Bellingham Mall, Kara distributed flyers and put up posters as part of the hunt. Someone must have seen her since the movie ticket was for a 2:30 p.m. screening, and Kara assumed that her sister would have wanted to eat first. She continued her investigation by asking throughout the food court, and eventually learned that Leah was seated at a bar at the mall's only sit-down restaurant, conversing with 2 guys across from her while eating alone. One man confessed to the police that he recalled her when they finally caught up with him. Him described her as sociable, and she and him discussed Jack Kerouac and her upcoming travels before she departed alone for the film. But that man's tale was different. Leah had been lively and chatty, he acknowledged, but he insisted she hadn't been by herself. A guy called Barry had accompanied her to the theater. They created a picture of Barry since the second man gave such a comprehensive description of him. An earring adorned the right lobe of this white man's somewhat narrow face, which he wore in a medium-length style with a reverse brush and no part. His jawline was quite square. Oddly enough, nobody else in the eatery had seen this other individual either. The authorities began to suspect the second guy of involvement in Leah's abduction due to the unusually comprehensive description he provided. An unnamed man contacted the authorities around 1 week after the discovery of Leah's Jeep, stating that Leah had been seen by his wife at a Texaco petrol station in Everett, Washington. According to him, he panicked and hung up when his wife indicated she was behaving strangely, maybe because she was confused. This matched the schedule since Everett is 60 miles south of Bellingham. The authorities have yet to get a response from this witness, and the mystery surrounding his sudden hang-up remains unsolved. To make matters worse, this caller represented their last lead. From that point on, no one had any leads or sightings, and the investigation essentially died. Kara did not want to let this go, which is understandable. Monica Kazan, an expert in assisting families with cold case missing person situations, was contacted by her. They probably wouldn't have done this had they known better. After the original lead detective departed in 2007, a new detective was appointed to the investigation. So clearly they did an excellent job. Restarting the search was their first move. Attempts to locate Leah's remains around the accident scene were renewed with the help of cadaver dogs and metal detectors. They were hoping that by using the metal detectors, they may find Leah's leg and discover whether she had been buried there. After failing to uncover anything new, they resorted to using the evidence at their disposal. At this point, they realized what the previous group had overlooked. It had never occurred to anybody to inspect the Jeep's engine. After the new detectives requested forensics to lift the hood, they discovered that the starter relay cover had been removed. Even without it, you may start the engine by inserting the key into the ignition and turning the relay, so the vehicle will accelerate regardless of whether or not someone is inside. No one short of a technician or an automotive expert could possibly perform this. It came out that Leah's second dining companion had a background as a military technician. Underneath the hood, they discovered fingerprints as well. These two pieces of evidence strongly suggested that they should revisit their conversation with the second guy. Even though it was difficult to rearrest him when he relocated to Canada, they were able to interview him and collect his DNA and fingerprints in the end. However, once again, they were incongruous with the prints discovered in the vehicle. On the other hand, the incoming group took several articles of Leah's clothes from storage and sent them to the FBI for DNA testing. Prior teams had conducted blood tests, but technology capable of detecting trace DNA was not available when Leah vanished. They finally uncovered a man's DNA in 2010 after 3 long years of searching. Subsequent evidence disproved the initial explanation, which postulated that she had either amnesia, wandered away from the automobile, or faked the whole incident in order to vanish. The second guy in the restaurant is among those whose DNA has not yet matched. Even after more than a decade of working on the investigation, the cold case team has not made any progress in determining Leah's fate. Both of these cases remain open and unresolved as of now. So, in your opinion, what transpired? I really appreciate you sticking around if you have, and I hope to see you in the next one.